All right. Hello, Catholic YouTube. Brian with City of the Immaculata. Back with you on an important day. Another impromptu. There's just so much going on in the world. What an amazing time to be alive and to be a Catholic. With all that's happening in the last 50 years of being a Catholic, there's never a bad time to be a Catholic, but it's certainly an interesting time to be alive. Today, as the title lets you know, we will be talking about the news that came out yesterday that our first American Pope, our first English speaking Pope as a first language since, I guess Alexander the Third, I believe, was the last time we had one. So the 11th century. It's been a little while, and that would have been Old English that he would have been speaking. But anyways, a new Pope, an English-speaking Pope, has announced that the first doctor of the church that he will be bequeathing that title to is an English-speaking theologian, St John Henry Newman. And the reaction has been mixed, as the reaction around Newman has been since the time that he converted. Actually, even before he converted, Newman was a controversial figure within his own circles in his own days. The news, as you know, just to kind of give away the plot here, is fantastic for those of us that are right-minded, orthodox, modern, one foot in the modern world, one foot in antiquity kind of folk who struggle sometimes to navigate the complexities of modernity. So we're going to talk a little bit today about why the reaction has been what it's been. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because I don't find those people particularly interesting. As Jackson here illustrates, the radical Newmanites will rule the world. This is a much more interesting topic to me. So as far as the reaction goes, most of what I've seen has been good. I've got the only social media that I really use at this point is X. I've got most of the progressives on X, progressive Catholics, muted. I'm trying to think if there's any that I don't have muted at this point. So if there is, it wouldn't be that many. So I can't say it's been a muted reaction on my end as far as what I've seen from the progressives about this news. I would assume maybe some of them are prematurely excited about the prospects of it, for the very same reason that the traditionalists, and this should tell you guys something about how I approach these things. Generally speaking, I don't mute the traditionalists or block them unless they have to be particularly obnoxious for me to go out of my way to do so. I find them just a little bit more tolerable, we'll say. So I've seen the traditionalist reaction to this, and it's been pretty sour. The common complaint that I've seen has been that because the progressives get so excited around Newman, therefore Newman is one of them, as if, Newman has any, how shall I say this, as if Newman has any logical and consistent comparableness to modern 21st century progressive Catholics. In fact, much of what Newman was doing was the antithesis of what these people are doing. But the reality is that many progressives, many modernists have latched on in a sort of nominal way to something like the development of doctrine. I think that is something to, always be wary of, but it's no different than in the same way that, and this is what I've been bringing up to my traditionalist friends out there, it's no different than in the way that, say, certain Alexandrians in the time of Chalcedon latched on to the language of St. Cyril to refute, say, for example, Pope Leo's tome or the language of Chalcedon. So just because people use someone's writings in a way that the person that wrote the writings, because I think any of you that are watching this and any traditionalist Catholic would probably agree, St. Cyril is an Orthodox thinker. St. Cyril is not a Monophysite. So acknowledging that, we have to also acknowledge that there were people that used St. Cyril in a way that he did not himself intend for his writings to be used. And I think the same thing applies down through history in many different cases. Probably no one has been more used and abused than St. Paul himself. So we have a long-standing history of this in probably anything. So Newman, what was he doing? I think it's going to be interesting to see what the title is that they come up with this, because here's the thing about a lot of people, I think, get confused about what exactly this title, the implications of this title is. It's an important thing to be made a doctor of the church, but it's not like they're like, super saint status now. That's not what the purpose of being a doctor of the church is. Really, it's kind of an academic term more than it is anything else. What it's telling the church militant is that this particular saint, this particular person, wrote in such a way that you are not only safe to study them, but we also, in a way, are pointing you towards studying this particular person. And the titles are often reflective of the way in which the church, it's not exclusive, but it's an indication of, okay, when I am reading the moral doctor, right? When I'm reading like St. Alphonsus Liguori, I should be focused on his moral theology, because that's what, in the sense that I'm reading him in a strict academic theological sense. If I'm reading the mellifluous doctor, if I'm going to be reading St. Bernard, I should be reading his sermons, as the particular emphasis. If I've got this title, it's really what it is it's what's called the Loci Theologici. This was a theory that was come up with by Melchior Cano when we're looking at the sources of authority in the church. There's various different means by which we draw our sources of authority. And, of course, obviously scripture, the tradition of the church, the magisterium. But within this broader tradition of the church, there are subcategories. And among those subcategories, you would find the doctors of the church. And so if you're a theologian and you're studying moral theology, the church has pointed you towards St. Alphonsus Liguori. If you're a theologian and you're studying the, aspects of preaching, if you're studying angelology, if there's any of these like particular things that the church has given us doctors, these are what these titles are helpful for. So it'll be interesting to see which title they come up with for Newman. I'm of the opinion that it's probably going to be, well, I don't actually want to say what it's probably going to be, because I'm likely to be wrong here. And like, if the news isn't already out at the time that this recording this live goes out, the few that I've heard that actually kind of makes sense to me. One is Doctor of Modernity. And I think this would actually be a very good title for Newman. The problem with that title, just to kind of get that out the way first, is that modernity has such a negative connotation with it. And there's already, like, if we wanted to like troll the mad trads that are online, call Newman, what would it be? I guess Dr. Modernitatis. If you wanted to troll them, we would call Newman the Doctor of Modernity, but that actually wouldn't be the purpose. It's actually somewhat of an apt title, because in my opinion, one of the important things about Newman is that he, more than probably any other theologian, Catholic theologian of modernity, or philosopher for that matter, historian might be pushing it a little bit, but certainly as a theologian, certainly as a philosophical thinker, as a theological thinker, I think Newman has engaged modernity in a greater extent than just about any other modern Catholic thinker has. And I'm talking like I know people have their little camps, and I'm not trying to beat up on anyone here, but if you take even the neo-scholastic movement or the ressourcement, the so-called Nouvelle Theologie, right? Like any of these guys, they're in a sense trying to grasp at ways to deal and to challenge modernity. Well, some of them just embrace modernity, but all of the ones that and again, I'm not like an expert in any of those particular people, but all of the ones that I have read, that I've spent time with, many of them do one of two errors. And I would say the neo-scholastics are more inclined towards one error, the ressourcements towards another error. And that is that they either wholesale deny, dismiss, I guess dismiss is the correct way. They dismissed the objections of modernity without ever actually engaging them. And that's nice. That's convenient for those people who just want to kind of get on with life and just pretend like this thing doesn't exist. But all you have to do is just step out. I live in a fairly conservative area with a fairly conservative population of people, and I can still see many of the errors and problems of modernity right outside my own front door. So like we can pretend that the problem of modernity doesn't actually exist, or that it didn't actually come from somewhere, and that all that we need to do is just hold this line from 16th century Baroque manualists. I have my own problems with that. The other problem is this just kind of wholesale embrace of modernity. And I think you could find that with characters like, dare I say, Rahner. I guess Rahner would be the big culprit, but there's several others who tend to, try to just completely not even synthesize, but just incorporate, say, Hegel into a Catholic context, Catholic period. Newman doesn't do that. One of the reasons that you find on the progressive side, those few progressives that have actually spent any time with Newman, they tend to not like him, because they realize once you kind of get past that initial, oh, look, Newman's actually engaging with modernity. Like once you kind of get past that initial step, you will quickly realize that his engagement of it, even if he's acknowledging certain, the validity of certain arguments being made, or the validity of certain concepts, or challenging certain presuppositions, like Newman might do all of that at any given point. Sometimes, though, it's just as a thought experiment to sort of get the conversation off the ground. But just because he's doing that by far does not mean that he has embraced Kant. It doesn't mean that he's embraced Hegel. In fact, in many ways, I think a proper understanding of Newman, you would see that he provides something of the antidote to those problems. So the modern approach of wholesale rejection, a wholesale acceptance, two different errors. Newman comes in, he does what I think it's probably the hardest thing for anybody that's an academic to do this, because it's very, very challenging. And it takes a certain type of brilliance. It takes a certain caliber of mind to be able to penetrate somebody like Immanuel Kant, and to like pull out what, in so much as there is truth in Kant, to pull out those elements of it while also seeing the errors of Immanuel Kant, and being able to properly analyze why they're actually erroneous, without making a sort of fallacious straw man of Immanuel Kant in the process, which honestly, up until the time that I read Newman, I hadn't seen anybody that, in my opinion, thoroughly engaged. I hadn't seen a Catholic thinker thoroughly engage Immanuel Kant without and at the same time accepting certain things that I thought were incompatible with the traditional Catholic view of things. Not Newman. And my favorite work to him by him is without a doubt an essay in the aid of the grammar of assent. And again, I don't count myself among the like top tier theologians out there, but I am working on my own particular work about how do we assent? Well, how do we come to certitude? And then how do we have assurance in our faith? And I've leaned heavily into Newman, in particular his illative sense, to draw out much of the arguments that I make. So if the church comes out with this, as say the doctor of modernity, then I will be in good company with this particular book that I'm working on writing. I don't think that they're going to pick that one, though. I think the word modern has too much baggage that goes along with it. And Pope Leo, being the astute American that he is, probably will not pick that title. Though I do think it would be an apt one for Newman, properly understood. And to sort of elaborate further on what I was saying a second ago, the challenge of any scholar is to wade into something as dense and complex as modern philosophy, and without, again, totally dismissing it or completely accepting it. And I find that to be the hardest thing of any kind of academic exercise that we engage in. Typically the thing to do, and there's nothing wrong with this, but typically the thing that most of us do is we'll find somebody like St. Thomas, we'll find somebody like Bonaventure or Augustine or whomever, and we'll just kind of accept on face value what they're telling us. And that's fine. I mean, that kind of master to student lineage of a thing being handed down through the generations. It's important and it's good. And I'm not knocking that by far. We don't want to reinvent the wheel every generation. But occasionally we need people, especially when you have something like a complete philosophical revolution take place, which happened with the Enlightenment. And I've heard some people throw out the idea that modernity isn't actually a real thing, and that it's sort of an illusory thing that academics point to, and even this whole concept of a postmodern period that we're entering into now. Now, I might be willing to say it's a little premature to call out post-modernity, but I think you would actually have to be somewhat naive to think that with the Enlightenment, with the Industrial Revolution, and with all the technological revolutions that took place, that we didn't actually really have a massive overhaul of the human experience, of the human project. And we've entered into, in some ways, a pretty dark era of it. Now, that's not to say there's been dark eras of it all throughout the entire period of it. I mean, certainly there was the upheavals and revolutions of the 19th century, and then the sheer bloodbath of the 20th century. And now we've entered into something of like an almost nihilistic, apathetic period of modernity. But to think that there isn't this thing, modernity, that we're all contending with, I think is a mistake. And again, Newman was right there at the fore of it. He was sort of the later thinkers of people like who would be relevant, like Heidegger, or in the Catholic Church like a Rahner, or some of these other, like even on the neo-scholastic side, like a Garrigou-Lagrange, if we're just keeping it within the Catholic sphere of things. They're kind of thinking about things downstream a little bit, whereas I think Newman is just he's sort of poised at an interesting period of time to see the initial onslaught of modernity as it's hitting, without all of the downstream repercussions of it that we're now sort of filtering through. So he's a fantastic person because by the time you get to Newman, you've had Immanuel Kant, you've had Hegel, you've had some people, you've had time to digest these things. So that's an important aspect of him. And the other aspect, too, is just to kind of keep in mind related to all of this is just what a first-rate scholar he was. And Newman was, I think, even if you dislike Newman, you should. I've heard some people claim that they claim his scholarship is shoddy. I think to quote to use a word that Gen Z uses, I think that's total cope. I don't think that's actually true. There are people that, I mean, look, John Calvin, he was a first-rate mind. He was his mind was like, his worldview was warped, but John Calvin was a brilliant man. There's no denying it. You know, Robespierre was a brilliant man. Vladimir Lenin was like these. You can acknowledge people are brilliant thinkers, even if you disagree with Newman's conclusions. And I know there's some bitterness, especially with the Anglicans, especially with the Anglo-Catholics toward Newman, for they see him basically as betraying what the Oxford movement's project was. Be that as it may, I still think you'd have to acknowledge that he was a first-rate scholar. And that's going to be an important one, too, for the title that they're throwing out there that I've seen, which I think would be another apropos title, is that of Doctor of Conscience. Because Newman writes about the conscience in such a way that I think in the modern world that we're living in today, and this, I mean, the Doctor of Modernity, I think, would be all encompassing. But if we're going to like hone in on something specific, I could see Doctor of Conscience being a particular one. Because if you follow, and this is what I think the Anglo-Catholics are a little bit unfair. Look, I get it. The guy, you think he was your man, and then he sort of betrayed that movement. Because with the Oxford movement, all of the reaction against the Oxford, the Tractarians, was that this is a crypto-Roman Catholic movement that's subversive, and it's like a fifth column. And the Oxford guys are like, no, we swear we're perfect. This is true Anglicanism. And then like their number one guy comes over to the Roman Catholic Church. And then the other Protestants are like, we told you so. And I do think maybe those other Protestants might have had a little bit of a point. That would be a digression. But as far as the Doctor of Conscience goes, you read Newman's Apologia, which is just another one of his must-read works. This one's a little bit more dense, a little harder to follow, but he speaks of the process of conversion for him. It's an apologetics work of why he had to convert to the Catholic Church. And basically he says, look, if I would have stayed in the Anglican Church for whatever reasons, for allegiance to God and country, right? I would have been disobeying my conscience. He at a certain point intellectually, many of us converts have been through this process. Intellectually, we have crossed the Tiber. We have swum the Tiber intellectually, but there's these things that are these, external things that have kept us. Sometimes it's just a matter of the will from making that jump fully into the Catholic Church. And Newman said, look, intellectually, his conscience, he had formed himself to the point that he wanted to become a Roman Catholic. And so, sorry, the family just walked in the door here, so I'll have to end this here in a minute, but just give me 1 second, okay? Conscience, Doctor of Conscience. I think this would be an apropos one because of the consistency of his thought, where basically even a Protestant, if they properly understood what Newman was getting at, there is a certain point where, and the Catholic Church is very clear about this, that if you believe that the Catholic Church is who she says she is, it's at that point that you take on a certain degree of culpability, where you need to convert. And I've taught RCIA before, and I've had some people who were kind of like sitting on that fence, and I give people room, that breathing room, because I know it takes time. But there was a good friend of mine. I won't mention your name in case you watch this, but you know who you are. And I kind of had to do the man talk with him, right? Like there was 2 years in a row where he was sitting in my class. And finally, at the end of the second year, I was like, look, man, what's the deal here? Do you believe? Like, I'm not going to give you some esoteric knowledge in this class that you haven't heard yet. You've heard the class twice now. Do you believe that the Catholic Church is who she says she is? He sat there with it for a second, and he said, I do. And I said, well, you're flirting with dangerous territory at that point. So the formation of the conscience is a very important thing that I think, especially as we work into this period of what I actually do believe is important and needs to happen, a new evangelization that the church has asked about. The development of the conscience is one of the areas in which we need to flesh out the academic and the theological insights of Newman on this. I think would be a great tool for theologians who are sort of working through this thing called new evangelization. Let's see here. Joseph Ratzinger, the centrality of the concept of conscience for Newman is linked to the prior centrality of the concept of truth and can only be understood from this vantage point. Exactly. And I'm going to have to let you guys go here in a second, but there is an important link between that idea, the concept of truth, and what Ratzinger himself was a huge promoter of the new evangelization, though unfortunately neither he nor John Paul II left us. I say unfortunately, it's actually fortunate in some respects. We need people to put these things into practice. And I think by Newman being made a doctor right now when he is, all of this stuff is very providential in its timing, because the link between the centrality of truth to evangelization, the original evangelization, and what could potentially be the new evangelization is there. I unfortunately don't have time to go into it with you guys right now, but these are my initial thoughts. I say praise be to God. It is an amazing time to be alive. It's an amazing time to be Catholic. There's, I have a really good hope and inclination towards what the fruits of this papacy of Pope Leo XIV were going to be. I didn't think we were going to be handed such a gift so soon. I'm super excited to hear what the title for Newman is going to be, and expect on this channel anyways, you can go back into some of my earlier lectures. I have stuff on Newman, but expect on this channel to always see the promotion of this great soon to be doctor of the church, maybe doctor of modernity, maybe doctor of conscience, maybe for doctor of something that we didn't have time to get into here today, but certainly a doctor nonetheless. And I hope to help promote him in my own small way on this channel. So God bless you all. And you guys have a good rest of your week.